Okay. Yesterday we saw machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva. By Nazir, someone who takes a Nazir, a Nazirite oath, a Nazir who is usher in yayin and kol yitzim and agefen and wine and anything that comes from the vine, from a grapevine. And the Torah says the word mishras, which means soaking. We saw that the Chachamim say that from that we learn tam ke'ikr de oraisa, that anything that is infused with a flavor of something that's prohibited gets the status of that which is prohibited, and in itself becomes a prohibited item. So if there's butter flavor in whatever you made and the butter is not kosher, so then the food itself is not kosher, etc. Tam ke'ikr. And whereas Rabbi Akiva had the source of tam ke'ikr from Geulei Nachrin, from the mitzvah where the Torah said that when they came back from the battle of Midian, that they needed to kasher, they needed to put the metal vessels through a kashering process to remove whatever was infused with or whatever was absorbed in the walls of that vessel, so it doesn't then get absorbed in the food and essentially put the flavor in there. So we see that the Torah was concerned with the flavor of non-kosher coming into your food, and it would be prohibited. And from there he learns that by all prohibitions there's a prohibition of tam ke'ikr, that the prohibited item's flavor also would cause the kosher food to become non-kosher. So what does he do with the teaching of mishras? That is the used for what Rabbi Yochanan said at the beginning of yesterday's daf, to tell us that anything that has the flavor of that anything that has a mixture of the prohibited item together with a permitted item, they will combine to become the minimum amount needed to transgress. So that's the concept of heter mitztaref le'iser. The prohibited item and the permissible item combine to become prohibited, or not to become prohibited, to fill the minimum amount to transgress the prohibition. Meaning that if there's an infusion of flavor, so of course then the prohibited item and the permissible item becomes the prohibited item. But if there's no infusion of flavor, that means that it's such as in the case of bread and wine. So you dip some of the bread into wine, some of the bread is not dipped into wine, and so now you have some bread that is just bread, and some of the bread has wine in it, and the Nazir eats a complete zayis, olive size, but some of it has wine flavor and actually wine in it, and some does not. So then the heter mitzdaref le'iser, and that's what Rabbi Akiva says is a specific concept for Nazir, as Rabbi Yochanan said, and Zeiri said also for Chametz. Where did we ended up quickly at the end of yesterday's daf with the concept of tam ke'ikr, Rabbi Akiva's source being from the vessels of Midian. And we had a question in the Gemara, but what about the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Akiva and said, no, but the vessels of Midian are a very unique prohibition because really the flavor is not good anymore. So this brings us to a machlokes as to what was the basis of the prohibition or the obligation to kasher the vessels. Rabbi Akiva said that was talking about the vessels that had been used within 24 hours, and you may be familiar with this from your home kitchen and in kashrus. Once a vessel has not been used for 24 hours, that's eino ben yomo, it's not of that day. So then all of the absorption, the flavor absorbed in the vessel itself starts becoming a negative taste. And when that's infused back into your food that you cook in there the next day, that really would not prohibit the food. However, l'chatchila, you're not allowed to cook in it because you're bringing the non-kosher in. If you happen to have cooked in there, it would not prohibit the food. because the flavor that it infuses is going to be a negative flavor. Tam ke'ikr, the prohibition on a Torah level, the prohibition of flavor is only if the flavor is actually beneficial to the food. It's good. And so if the flavor is within the 24 hours, it will give a beneficial flavor. And that's why Rabbi Akiva says that since the Torah said you need to kasher, because the flavor is still within 24 hours of when they cooked in there. And so the flavor is a beneficial flavor. It's nosing tam l'shvach, for benefit. Therefore, it is prohibited, and you have to kasher. And so we see that flavor itself becomes the prohibited item, and if it goes into the food, the item itself becomes prohibited. And the Chachamim disagreed because they said, no, even though that within 24 hours, the flavor is still beneficial, but every moment it becomes less and less good flavor. And yet the Torah prohibited it, so it's a unique thing, and so we can't learn from anywhere else. And that's why the Chachamim say we learn from Nazir. Rabbi Akiva says, no, we can learn it from the obligation of kashering the Midianite vessels. And since we know tam ke'ikr, that flavor is the essence itself, or the substance of and the permissible food that now has that flavor becomes prohibited. So we have the extra word of mishras by Nazir to tell us that by Nazir there's a unique concept of heter mitztaref le'isr, that the permissible is going to combine with the prohibited to get the minimum amount to transgress. Now the Gemara is going to say, okay, so if we know that in regards to tam ke'ikr, the flavor becoming the essence, and when it's infused in something else, that becomes prohibited. If we know that's true for all Torah, so why don't we say the same thing for heter mitztaref le'isr, and say just like the concept of tam ke'ikr, prohibition of the prohibited flavor is a general rule throughout all prohibitions, so too heter mitztaref le'isr should not only be for Nazir, and according to Zeiri also by Chametz, it should be for every prohibition the same concept. And that's the Gemara's question. We're going to see distinctions. So we're going to begin on Mem Dalet Amud Beis 44b, about 5-6 lines from the bottom. Amale Rav Acha Bereda Rav Avia le Rav Ashi. Rav Acha's said to Rav Ashi, Midrabanan Ishmael Rabbi Akiva. From the Rabbanan, we should be able to assume also for Rabbi Akiva. Mile Amar Rabbanan Mishras Litin Tam Ke'ikr. The Rabbanan said that the extra word of mishras, soaking, by the by the grapes of a Nazir, where the Torah, where they learn that means that flavor infused in the water, a grape dropped into water and soaks in there. Now the water has a great flavor that it's prohibited to a Nazir. So from there we learn throughout all the Torah, every prohibition also has tam ke'ikr, the infused flavor becomes the essence and the food becomes prohibited. So from there we learn to all prohibitions of the Torah. So too, Rabbi Akiva Nami, Mishras Letem Etzaref L'Isser. Rabbi Akiva, who knows the concept of prohibited flavor from the vessels of Midian, so therefore he has the extra word of Mishras to tell us that even the permissible food that does not have flavor, such as the bread, that it will combine together with wine in order to have the minimum amount. Why don't we say that too is learned to all over the Torah? We should say that this is a general rule from Mishras, from Nazir. We can learn that throughout the whole Torah, this is a concept that the heter and the iser will combine, the permissible and the prohibited will combine to have the requisite amount, the minimum amount. Amalei. So we go to Memheim and Aleph at the top, and he says that the reason is because there are twice that the Torah says this concept that that permissible and prohibited combine to the minimum for the minimum amount. And we know as a rule that if the Torah said it twice, ein malamdim, then it's specific to those two places, and it's not a general rule, because if it was a general rule, one would suffice. Since the Torah said it twice, and we could have learned everything from there, and we didn't, is evidence that it's only these two places where the Torah said so. Nazir hada amran. So it says it by Nazir, like we just said, because Mishras tells us that heter and isser are mitzaref, the permissible and prohibited combined for the minimum amount. Chatas mahi, and where do we see it by chatas? The Tani we learned. A chatas is a korban. Only a kohen is allowed to eat it in specific places, specific time, only for that day and that in the coming night, and only in the azara, only in the Beis Hamikdash. The Tani we learned kol asher yiga b'vsara yikdash, and therefore non-korban meat that touched korban meat becomes itself sanctified, and it has the rules of whatever the meat was. Perhaps even if it didn't absorb anything from the chatas meat, that's what it says in its meat, meaning to tell you that it has to be absorbed into the meat. Yikdash, and what is the sanctification that it gets? Lios kama, that it becomes the same rules. Whatever meat touched the chatas meat, the offering meat of the sin offering, gets the same rules of the meat. She'im pesula, that if there was an invalidation in the korban and the meat became invalid, the korban became invalid, so you're not allowed to eat it. So too, whatever touched it, if it absorbed it, is also going to be prohibited to be eaten. Hiti pasel, it also becomes invalid. The im kshera, and if it is kosher, so it was a kosher chatas korban, and so a kohen is allowed to eat it in specific time and place. So too, the meat that touched it is going to have that stringent rule and have those obligations as well inside the courtyard for a kohen that day and that night, and no more. So we see that even though that there's only a little bit of chatas in there, it's going to combine to the prohibition, and it's going to be prohibited piece of meat combining to the chatas and the minimum olive size that this person eats, which has some chatas in there and some of the mundane meat. It will combine to the minimum amount, and this is not about flavor because they're both meat, so they both taste the same. So you can't taste the chatas. It's only on account of the chamer shaba, only on account of the chatas is in there, and when you have a little bit of heter and a little bit of isser, some permissible, some prohibited, they combine. So,
sorry, what a question, please?
Let me just finish thought. So therefore, since we have twice that the Torah said this, once by chatas and once by a nazir, that the permissible combines to the prohibited, so we know that it's only for these two places and not anywhere else in the Torah.
We do say tam ki ikar for the pot that the chatas was cooked in. So you have that can't be used for anything else except because it already has the tam of the chatas balua in it. So you're saying now that even though there's no blia of the chatas in the meat that's chulin, even though there's no distinguishable taste from the chatas, that still it's. I mean, what happened there? I don't get it.
No, there's an infusion of some of the korban meat. So the meat, let's say they roasted them together near each other, and they touched, and so the chatas that is the korban meat touched the non-korban meat, the regular piece of meat, and so some of its juices and some of its fats went into the other meat, and now there's some absorption. You can't distinguish it by flavor, but there's an absorption of some of the chatas in the regular meat, and so now you cannot eat it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, and you cannot eat it the next day, and only a kohen can eat it. These are the rules of a chatas. Whoever can eat the chatas, and wherever and whenever you can eat the chatas, is what's going to apply to the mundane meat. Even though that you don't have a full kazayas when you eat it, right? You're not going to have a full kazayas and olive size of the chatas meat, but the non-chatas will combine to the chatas to give you a full olive size.
So it'd be the same thing with a kli. If you took like ben yomoy, if you took a piece of chulin meat and you cooked it in the pot that the chatas meat had been in, even though it's meat and the same flavor, same taste, but still there would be a blia from the chatas from the kli into the chulin. Then that's why you can't do it.
That's another thing. The Torah says that the chatas vessels have to be kashered. That's not what we're learning from here. Here we're learning kolasha yiga bivsara, actual touching of the meat. That's another halacha where the Torah says that the vessel has to be kasher. Here we're just learning that what touched the meat, which actually has absorption of, it has some of the actual chatas meat in there, not just flavor. It has actual chatas meat in there, is going to be prohibited because you're going to have some prohibited or some permissible joined together in an olive size.
We've sort of pivoted from tam to ikr because there's not an issue of tam here.
Correct. Not because of tam, because of heter mitzdaref le'isr, because the permissible and prohibited join together. Okay. Fine. So the Rabbanan say, well, why don't we say for the Rabbanan as well? Well, we now have two teachings. Rabbanan namin let the two be two verses that tell you the same thing. They say, actually, no, we need them both. And the Gemara is going to explain in a moment why we need them both, why we couldn't learn chatas from nazir and nazir from chatas. Rabbi Kiva says, really? Why can't you learn one from the other? Bishla, because of Rachmana b'chatas. If the Torah had only said in regards to the korban, which is holy, that the permissible and prohibited would join together and to be mitzdarif and combine for the minimum amount, like gamir nazir mine. I wouldn't learn the prohibition of nazir as well, because I'd say the chula mikachan like gamrina. Perhaps this is a stringency in regards to hektish, in regards to something that's sanctified to the Beis Hamikdash, a korban. But in regards to mundane foods, we don't have this concept of permissible and prohibited joining, combining to the minimum amount. Ela lichtav rachmana ben nazir, but if the Torah had only written it by nazir, I would say if it's true by nazir, which is, as we saw yesterday, it's a limited prohibition to a limit for a limited time that can be could be renounced, and there's a heter that you could get the basin to null the vow, and it's not prohibited in benefit. Then yet the Torah says that the permissible will combine with the prohibited to get the minimum amount. So that for sure, I would learn that for sure it's true for a chatas. Because we learn everything from nazir, and therefore, since the Torah said specifically also by chatas, if it touches, it becomes prohibited, to tell you that it's only these two places and nowhere else. V'Rabbanan Amri, and the Rabbanan say no. He says no. The Chachamim say here by chatas, by the sin offering, which the meats touch one another. There, it's teaching us the concept of heter mitzdaref le'isr, that the permissible will combine with the prohibited, even though that there isn't per se a flavor. Nevertheless, the chatas is going to infuse some of itself into the permissible, and when you eat the permissible, you get some of the meat that's kosher to you, and some that's prohibited that only a kohen is allowed to eat, and only in the Beis Hamikdash, and only in the Azara, and only on that day. And therefore, since there's the permissible joining to the prohibited, and to get a minimum of a kazayis, therefore you're not allowed to eat it. So we see that by chatas heter, the permissible will combine with the prohibited to create a minimum amount. So that's where the Chachamim say only by chatas we have that. However, by nazir, mishras litin tam keikir, mishras is there to tell you that the flavor even if there's no actual substance, there's only the flavor infusion, that's enough to make something prohibited. And that would actually apply to the rest of the Torah as well. However, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva, who learns that the infusion of flavor we already know from the vessels of Midian, for the Klei Midian, where the Torah says that you have to kasher those vessels and get rid of the flavor that's absorbed in the pots themselves. So that there he already knows a Torah prohibition of flavor. So therefore, the concept of mishras, of soaking by the olives, is there not for infusion of flavor, but for a combination of permissible and prohibited, and that they would combine to the minimum amount. And we also have it by chatas, and that tells us it's only true in regards to these two prohibitions and nowhere else. So it's two verses telling us the same, and we don't learn from there to other places in the Torah. Amalei Ravashi Rav Kahana. So Ravashi said to Rav Kahana, Elaha Detanya Mikola Sheyasa Megefan Ayayin Michatzana Vadzag. Well, the Torah said another teaching in regards to the Nazir, that anything that's made of the vine, from the seed to the skins, or from the skins to the seed, Limit al Isurei Nazir Shematztarfim Zemzeh. And that tells us that that all prohibitions of Nazir will combine with each other. Now, Hashal Rabbi Akiva Isav Etem Estarif. Why do I need that? If Rabbi Akiva is right, that even a piece of bread, a non-vine made food, will combine with a grape to have the minimum amount of a kazayis. Hashal Rabbi Akiva Isav Etem Estarifin Isav Mabayda. I have to tell you that two types of grape products would combine. That's obvious. And so that should be proof, not like Rabbi Akiva, from the fact that the Torah had to tell us that everything of a vine would combine. That indicates that only what's of a vine would combine, and not the permissible foods. Amalei, he said, no, there are two types of combination. When I eat it together, even a permissible and a prohibited would combine. It means you have some grape jelly on a piece of bread, combined, they make up an olive size. The bread itself tastes like bread. The jelly, the grape tastes like grape, but combined they have a kazayas. Now they're going to combine because I eat them together. However, if I have a little bit of a grape, less than an olive size, and then a little bit of grape leaf, less of an olive size, combined, they will combine even if they're not eaten together, but subsequent one to the other within the Kedei Achilas Pras, which we saw the other day, about 5 minutes, where within that time you would eat a portion of bread. All of the eatings combine to a kazayas, so too the different foods would also combine. Different prohibited foods would combine. But a permissible food would only combine if I eat it together at the same time as the grape, as the issa. Now this is the end of our sugya here about tam ke'ikr, infusion of flavor being a d'oraisa prohibition, and heter mitzdaref le'isser in regards to specific rules, specific places, including chametz, according to Zeiri, that the permissible will combine with the prohibited to give you the minimum amount. The Gemara in Chulin, where the basis of this is the Gemara in Chulin, which talks about kosher, is going to bring other opinions as well about the infusion of flavor, where we learn it, how we learn it, and whether it's the Raisa, the Rabbanan Torah prohibition. Now we get into a new subject matter, which is if you have dough, which was used as a filler for a crack in an earthenware vessel, or a crack in the plaster of the wall. They used to use dough as homemade patches or filler within cracks. So that dough that now hardened and became a part of the vessel, do you have to remove that for Pesach? Dough that is used as a patch in a crack of a bowl, let's call it, or a bucket. If there's an olive size combined in one spot, you have to remove it. But if there is not a kazayas, an olive size in one spot, but it's going to be nullified in its in how small it is. And similarly, in regards to a tamei vessel, if you want it to be removed, you don't want it there. So then you can't take the vessel that's tamei to a mikveh with this patchwork, with this dough in there, because it's not meant to be there, and so it's going to be a barrier between the mikveh and the vessel. But if you want it to remain there, you want that patch. It's a good seal for the crack in the vessel. Then it's a part of the vessel itself. Now, the Mishnah made a distinction between size. If the vessel, if the piece of dough in the vessel, in the crack, is less than an olive size, then it can remain there. More than an olive size, it cannot remain there. The Gemara didn't tell us where in the vessel. Essentially, the Gemara ultimately is going to tell us that there is a distinction between where it's needed in order to contain that which is in the vessel, and when it's not needed to contain what's in the vessel. And where is that? The Gemara didn't tell us either, and we'll see. Ultimately, we're going to get to 3 parts of a vessel. But at first, the Gemara is going to try and analyze the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah only made a distinction within size, but not where it is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel that our Mishnah that said that we have to remove it if it's an olive size. That's only true if it's not there to actually contain what's in the vessel. But if it actually is there to contain what's in the vessel, then you don't have to remove it, because you clearly want it to remain there. It's clearly a part of the vessel because it's acting as vessel. It's containing what's in there. And so therefore, even if it's larger than an olive size, you can keep it. So when the Mishnah said that it's less than an olive size, you can keep it. That can't be talking about where it's going to contain the vessel, because that's obviously, even if it's larger, you can keep it there, we just said. So it must be when the Mishnah said you can keep it there when it's less than the size, that's even if it's not there to contain what's in the vessel. Even if it's less than an olive size, since even if it's not there to contain, if it's less than an olive, you can keep it there. What was that, John? I didn't get a chance to read.
I'm just, just thinking that since this isn't the standard use for dough, maybe it shouldn't be treated the same or count the same as dough regularly does.
I think it was pretty common for them to use this. These were patchworks that they would use seemingly in walls when there was a crack in the wall. They didn't have some putty that they can go and get at your local hardware store to fill holes in the wall, or there were vessels in general. So it seems like this was a common patch that they would do.
But that's not, dough is usually for eating, right?
Oh, you're saying that it's not really edible, right? But we've just learned that there's a Torah prohibition and obligation to get rid of chametz, not only edible chametz, but even chametz noksha, even hardened chametz, right?
Okay.
And this is another example of chametz noksha, of hardened chametz, which you wouldn't really eat, but if I cooked it, I could, potentially eat it. If I got it out of the dough, out of the pot, and put it into out of the patch, and I put it into a pot of water and I cooked it, it'd probably be some bad tasting pasta.
Okay.
We'll see later today if we get to it, the concept of that once it's no longer edible even to a dog, and then it's not going to count as food anymore. So this is edible to something. So in the first version, we have here that Shmuel said the prohibition that if it's an olive size, you have to remove it. Kazayas has to be removed only if it is not in an area that contains the food. But if it contains the food, even an olive size doesn't need to be removed because it's actually working as a vessel. But if it's not in the area that contains the food, then an olive size must be removed, less not. But some say it on the next section of the Mishnah, and it's the reverse. This that it said, if it's an olive size, if it's less than an olive size, you don't have to remove it. That's it's so small you don't have to remove it. For that Shmuel said, that's only if it's containing the vessels. But if it's less than an olive size and it's also in an area that doesn't contain food, then you have to remove it. And now we're going to have a brisa that concurs with each one of these, which is contradictory. And we're going to have an explanation that says actually there are 3 areas in a vessel itself. So Tani Kalishna Kamya, Tani Kalishna Basra. We have a brisa that concurs with the first version as well as with the second. Tani Kalishna Kama. Where's the concurrence with the first version? Batzek Shabasidke Areva, a dough that's in the cracks of a vessel. If it's in the place that contains the contents. It's not going to be a barrier. So it can go to the mikveh that way. And you don't have to remove it because it's not a transgression for Pesach. However, if it's in a place that's not meant to contain the vessel, then it does count as a barrier, and you have to remove it. However, because that's only if it's an olive size. But if it's less than olive size, even though that it's in a part of the vessel that's not containing anything, it doesn't count as a barrier, and you can take it to the mikveh that way, and it's not going to be a transgression on Pesach. So now we clearly see, like the first version, that in an area that's containing the food, even larger than a kazayas, an olive size, is going to be a part of the vessel. If it's on the part of the vessel that doesn't contain the food, then it depends whether it's an olive or not. Tana Kalishna Basa, but we have a version like the second version. A dough in the cracks of the vessel in an area that's meant to contain the food. Now we go to Mem Hamad Beis. It's not going to be a barrier. And it's not going to be chametz for Pesach. However, it's not meant to contain chotzit, then it is going to be a barrier. And you will transgress for Pesach. However, but only if it's less than an olive size, even in the area that's made to contain it, the food. But if it's larger than an olive size, even if it's an area that's meant to contain food, it's going to be a barrier to the mikveh, and it's going to be a transgression on Pesach, because it's chametz. So now we have 2 brises that are completely contradictory. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna said, you know what, you're right. These are contradictory, and we have to say that one of them is a mistaken text. Let's remove the more lenient version. Sami kilta mechami chamirta. You have to remove the version of brisa that's more lenient because of the brisa that's more strict. Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef said to him, wait, Rav Huna, tanoi shaklas me'alma. You're removing every possibility of a disagreement, of a contradiction in opinion. Just because of that, you're going to remove a brisa? Tanoi, it's actually, we can say it's a machlokas tanoi. The Tani we learned in a brisa. Hapas she'ifsha, bread that had gotten moldy, chayv levayir, you nevertheless have to remove it for Pesach. Because you can scrape off the mold and then use the dough itself as a starter for other doughs. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that's only true if you're maintaining and holding on to the dough because you want to eat it. So then it counts as food. Aval kupas sa'or. But if you turned it into a block to sit on, sheyichta liyeshiva. So you turn this dough that had hardened and gone bad, and it's now something to sit on the ground. So betela, then you have turned it into non-food. You've turned it into just a brick, and it's nullified and it's not chametz. Now, Midama Rav Shimon Elazar betela. Since Rav Shimon Elazar said that it's nullified, so we see the first opinion says that even if you don't consider it food, you don't intend to eat it, you turned it into a vessel. Nevertheless, it's not nullified. And so there you have a machlokas of whether or not something that's food that you turn, that potentially could have been food, dough, but you're using it as another use, as a vessel use, whether it's nullified or not. So you see the first opinion, the Tanna Kama holds, even if you intentionally make it nullified by turning it into a brick to sit on, nevertheless, it's going to count as chametz and will not be nullified. And Rabbi Shimon Elazar says it is nullified. Fine. So you explained why when it's larger than an olive size, there's a machlokas of whether or not it's nullified or not. But pachas mekazayis mitaris, but there's also a contradiction of whether less than an olive size can be kept even in the place that it's not a part of the vessel, not containing. Where one brisa, the first brisa said less than an olive, even in the non-containing part, is allowed to be kept. Ella havaha Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So rather, there is no machlokas. Everybody agree. Both of these are the opinion of Rabbi Shimon and Elazar, and there's a different distinction. V'lo kasha. So we, up until now, assume there's where it contains and where it doesn't contain. Now we're going to have three versions. The bottom of the vessel, where it contains everything, liquid, solids, it's totally needed for the structure of the vessel. That everybody is going to agree, regardless of whether it's an olive size or less, it's going to be a part of the structure. All the way at the top, where really nothing's contained there. It's just there for the structure of a vessel, but no food gets up to the top of it. Then regardless of whether it's an olive size or not, it's not going to be a part of the vessel. And it's going to be chametz and needs to be removed. In between, so the lower side of the vessel, where some things are going to be contained there and some not, and it's not so necessary. So that's where we're going to make a distinction. Olive size is going to be need to be removed. Less than an olive size, less than a kazayis, does not need to be removed. And in each brisa, when they refer to contain or not contain, they're talking about a different thing. The first brisa, which is lenient, is talking about the bottom of the vessel itself. There, even an olive size can be kept. And when it says what's not meant to be contained, only if it's less than an olive, that's the side, but the lower side of the vessel. The second brisa, which is talking about the side of the vessel, the lower side and the upper side. So they call the lower side of the vessel containing, and there, only if it's less than an olive size can be kept. Bigger than an olive, bigger than a kazayis must be removed. Upper part of the vessel, not meant to contain, there even less than an olive is allowed to, it must be removed because it's not containing. And so the terms are not exactly the same. If the terms are not the same, then we understand that it's not a contradiction. What was that, Jared?
Sorry, I can figure out how to talk there. If it served the purpose at the top, like it removes a sharp edge, and then you're not
Still, it's not containing the vessel. It's not acting as vessel. That's the idea. That in order for it to be part of the vessel, it has to contain, which is acting like vessel.
Okay.
Even lower part, where it does contain, if it's too large, it's going to need to be removed. That's the concept. So now let's quickly go through that. If it's in the area that you would be kneading versus kneading, meaning KN, right? You're kneading dough there versus parts that you're not kneading in there. And as we explained, this is where the vessel itself is going to be, the lower part is going to be a kazayis, even a kazayis, the lower side, only if it's less than a kazayis, the upper part has to be removed, even if it's less than a kazayis. Amar Avashi, lo yitema shalem makam lisha, agabadagna, and don't tell me that the area that is not part of usage of the vessel is the outer side of the vessel. Ella sifta, even dagna, but even on the upper lip is also going to be counted as not part of the vessel and not something you can contain. And not keep it. So pshita, so that seems obvious. Why would the upper part of the lip be considered something you contain that contains contents of the vessel? Because sometimes it rises and hits up to there. Kamash Malan. So we learn that nevertheless, you're not allowed to keep it there. It's not really containing anything. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, halachic Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So Rav said the halach is like a Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that if you intentionally nullify chametz, it's nullified. Even if you're using it for a vessel to sit on, etc. Any, but it's not so. But we have another statement in the name of Rav that that only if you had put lime or plaster on the outside of the vessel, so then whatever is in the cracks that you use as a patch is going to be there forever, and so it's nullified there. Tach in only if you smeared the outside, but loy tach loy. But if you had not smeared it, then you have to remove it. So indeed, there are two versions in the name of Rav. Some say that he says Allah is like Shimon and Elazar, that it becomes nullified in the versions we said before, in the scenarios we said before, and one says no, only if you actually seal it in with a sealant. Those that say and some say that what Rav said is the halacha is not like a Rishon ben Elazar, because as the Amar Yitzchak Barashi Amar Rav, as he said in the name of Rav, if you had sealed it in by smearing it, it's nullified, and if not, not. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Another statement in the name of Shmuel in regards to this dough. If there are 2 half olives in 2 separate breaks in the vessel, however, the chut shel batzik b'neim, but there's a little strand of dough that sort of connects the 2 ends, the 2 half olive sizes. So right, so we're going to have to check it. If when he pulled the connector between the 2 half olive size, that would pull out the dough in the rest of it, then it's all 1 olive size, you have to remove it. If not, it's 2 half olive sizes, because the connector is not strong enough to pull both ends out, and it doesn't have to be removed. And this is only true in a vessel, in a bowl, in a barrel. In a bucket. But if it's on the wall of a house, you do have to remove it. Why? Because sometimes it'll join each other with another crack, another break, and the 2 halves become 1. Ula said, what happens if half an olive is in one room and half is in the attic? Or bayis v'chsadra, one is in a half olive is in the one room and the other is in the porch or the overhang. Mao shtei batim zelefnim, or one room and in another room next to it. Mao teku, and all these we don't have an answer for. Tomorrow we'll continue with the brisa about